But let's even assume that water with some carbon somehow or other magically cause a carbohydrate. Well, how do you get from there to a complex protein? What are the steps necessary to get to that? Then, after you have a complex protein, there's another point that has to be there, and that's self-generation, self-reproduction. How do you get this protein to reproduce itself? By what method? Let's even assume that these proteins somehow they got together to make a cell. Do you know how complex a cell is, a single cell? A single cell is composed of many different components. Where in the protein does it develop a cell wall? Does it develop a method for absorbing nutrition, and a method for reproducing itself, and a method for locomotion? I mean, all of these things exist within a cell. How does a string of carbohydrates become a complex protein? And how does a complex protein reproduce itself and then become a cell? You got to figure that out. And this is very complicated, because if you've ever seen a cell has got dozens of little parts in it. Now, where does the protein figure that out? How does that get figured out? And I gave you an example. I want to focus on one of the examples that I gave you regarding the eye, and talked about the development of the eye, the development of the ability to see. I use that as an example because hearing is similar to seeing or touch or any of the senses. I ask you a question. The protein, does it have any knowledge? Does it have any awareness? You say no. Well, how does the protein begin to be self-aware so that it can reproduce itself, that it can find food, that it can somehow or other exist independently and try to maintain its safety and security? How do you go from a string of molecules to an entity that's separate and existing on its own? How does that happen? By itself, by some magic, by cosmic ray bombardments. Do you really think that that's what happens? That can happen by itself? But let's go one step further. Now you've gotten a cell. To get the cell to continue on, the cell has got to be able to reproduce and to be able to survive before it can reproduce. How does the cell learn to get its food? How does a cell learn on its own to create its food? You have two options. You've got vegetable or animal. You've got vegetable manufactures its own food. How does it manufacture it? Through chlorophyll or some similar thing. How does it do that? This is all happening by itself, by some abracadabra cosmic ray bombardment in the course of many years, of course. I mean, do you understand what is needed to create those chemicals that cause one to be able to manufacture one's nutrition or to find nutrition and to be able to absorb it? And do you understand what is needed to be able to reproduce itself? The wisdom that is needed for that. The program that's needed for that. How does that happen by itself? Have you ever thought of that? Now, you have a cell, a single cell, that wants to survive. How does it survive? It has to make do with its environment. So it needs energy. So you say, well, it has to have the sun as energy, but if it goes out in the sun, it's going to fry. So it has to have some way of moving into the shade or shading itself with something. How does that happen by itself? And how does it happen that a single-celled animal, through the light of the sun, suddenly develops the ability to create photosynthesis by itself, of course? And then, wonder of wonders, you have a sensitivity to light. You understand that, or you feel that with this warmth, you can get energy. So you're drawn to that. Other creatures also want to get warm, so they go drawn to that, and they find the creatures that manufacture their own nutrition, that these can become nutritious, and they learn the art of eating other creatures. And that happens by itself too. And the art of eating another creature happens by itself. And it just so happens that the other creature that this creature eats is able to become absorbed without poisoning the first creature. You understand that this happens by itself. You also understand that basic existence, this is a single-celled creature, a very basic creature. It's got to move around and eat. How does it suddenly, through different gradations, become highly specified, specialized, and learns sensitivities, which we commonly call senses? From where? From where in its survival mechanism? Oh, gradations. What kind of gradations? Do you understand that just because something is light sensitive does not mean it can see? And how does it develop lenses to see? And how does it develop the ability to translate light into something that you can use in your brain? When does it get a brain? And how does it get a brain? It's not just that it's difficult, God of the gaps. I'm telling you that this is impossible for it to be on its own. It's just impossible. There is too much that has to happen. Too much randomness that has to happen. The amount of stuff that has to happen to affect what they call the genome, the DNA. Where do you get it? How does a cell develop a DNA? How does it learn that process? It automatically happens by itself, you think. It has a DNA to develop itself, and it has this string of molecules, and by fiddling with that somehow that you can change things around. That's post facto. To develop that string of complexity is so huge. Do you know what the DNA molecule is? It's not just a repository of billions or trillions of pieces of information. It even maps out information that isn't there. It's like a zip file. You condense it, and you're able to extrapolate from it other information that you don't even have. Now, this is not. If it wasn't the common thought, it would be silly. But this is the common thought. The common thought is it all happens by itself. I don't believe that. I think it's false. I believe God created all and gave everything its abilities to sense and to feel according to its function that God has presented for that on earth. And God created man with a brain, not just to figure out evolutionary processes, but to figure out what a grand world this is and how complex all of existence is, and marvel at the wisdom of the Creator. God gave us the wisdom, put the wisdom in the world, so we should understand that there is a universal wisdom that created all of this. The more we see in science, true science, the more we can appreciate the greatness of the Creator. And that, my friends, is the message of Passover. That is the message of the matzah. We'll talk about that later.